Thank you so much for the intro. And I mean, good morning to everyone. Like, I'm super, super excited for us to have the conversation that we're having this morning, especially, as the start of the week to talk about mental health and also just to talk about leadership. I know JP and I have had a lot of conversations just about the OPN community. And we know that there's a lot of founders, there's a lot of startups in the community. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is really geared towards startup mental health and whatnot. Okay, so today's conversation is we're really going to be talking about startup and founder mental health. And I'm really honored to do this conversation because especially, all of us being part of the same community, I really want to talk to you about some of the things that have been coming up amongst founders around mental health and tactical things that we can do together. And so just to give you a bit of context so you kind of know me a little bit more and also our work. So, as JP mentioned, I currently run a movement that's called For Founders by Founders. And if you saw the previous slide, there's a new logo. So we're actually rebranding to #RealTalk as of May. And part of the work that we do is really about bringing the mental health conversation to startups and to founders. And as a tech founder myself, I felt very called to start this movement in order to create safe spaces for us to talk about this. And sort of later on in the keynote, I'm going to be sharing a little bit more as well about my origin story, because I think it'll be something interesting in terms of looking at how mental health can appear, especially for founders. And so in terms of our impact to date, just a few little tidbits. So we currently exist in like 80 different ecosystems across many different cities in North America. And we have over 70 plus champions. And what this means is that they are colleagues of ours in our industry. So they're founders, they're investors, and executive directors. And they are people who have sort of pledged or donated their mental health stories to us so that we can all have the conversation together. And so in terms of today, the three things that I really want to share with you is, sometimes I think when we talk about mental health, especially in the tech industry, and especially if you are a founder who's listening right now, I know that it's a stressful time for many people. I know that a lot of people are worried and figuring out how to, keep their businesses going. And so we're going to be talking about really tactical, practical things with mental health. So I'm going to be talking about the impact that, what's happening right now with COVID-19, with physical distancing. What's the impact that that's having on businesses and how does that relate to mental health? Then we're going to be talking about, of course, the impact on you, right? The impact on leaders, the impact on founders and people in our startup ecosystem. And then the last thing is really talking about tangible steps for mental health. So, if we're in a place where we want to take those steps, we're thinking about how we can get, do tactical things, then that's the portion that we're going to be talking about to finish off. And so to kind of start off with, I want to talk a little bit about the context that we're in right now. So, a lot of businesses are being affected, and I'm sure many of you know, and the terminology has been coming up a lot in our industry, is that we're experiencing what is called a black swan. And what this means is that we're going through a really unprecedented event, right? So it's massive and it's unexpected change that many of us, despite our readiness, despite our preparation, it was something that wasn't really, wasn't something that was predictable. And so because of this black swan, some of the stresses that I'm already hearing in our ecosystem is, people having to deal with, layoffs, whether it's team members receiving it or founders having to sit with their leadership teams and sort of making those hard decisions. And also hard decisions too around things like cash flow, especially if you're, in the middle of a raise or you're trying to close a raise. And so the reality is, and especially as we're talking about mental health, is a lot of people are worried and concerned about, with COVID-19 and thinking about what's happening after, maybe we're not going to be heading back to the normal that we had prior to COVID-19. Maybe we're going to have to think about what the new normal is going to look like. So what the future of work is going to look like and how that's changed. And so one of the things I've referenced here is actually just a special report that was released by Trend Hunter a few weeks ago, which actually talked about what they're predicting is going to be the new normal, especially for our tech industry after COVID-19. And so, to sort of address the elephant in the room, I know that there are so many startups, there are so many entrepreneurs right now who are stressed about survival. And, especially in this portion, we're talking about financial survival. We're talking about, how to keep the company going. And so, some of the things that are there is like talking about raising money and also about cash flow. And the reality is, and I'm sure a lot of you have started hearing about this in conversations in our community, even though the government has tried to be responsive. So for example, some of these examples, so the response benefit and the wage subsidy, the reality is if you're, playing the startup game, and especially if you're an early stage startup, a lot of these responses are not things that we can actually obtain, right? So if you're a startup that is maybe pre-revenue, or maybe right now you don't have anyone, let's say permanently on your payroll and you're using contractors, a lot of these things may not apply to you. And so, obviously, as I said, the conversation's been happening a lot in our community, and people are worried how our startups are going to survive. And so, I'm really excited to be able to address mental health with all of you because, founders and a lot of leaders right now are feeling the responsibility of obviously leading ourselves, leading our entire companies or startups, and also, to be really frank, really providing and keeping our families safe. And so to be able to sort of break the silence, which is the theme of this morning, I just really want to share with you personally about some of the conversations I've had with our fellow peers. So these are all paraphrase quotes from founders. So I've just sort of changed some details to honor the confidentiality of these people. But yeah, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, I've had private conversations, so one-on-one conversations with over 50 tech founders and VCs. And these are some of the examples of mental health things, of emotional things that people are going through. So things like, I just laid off all 300 of my employees. I don't know how they will feed their families. Or, dealing with things like parenthood and like, how do I, be a good parent to my kids who don't really understand what's happening with COVID, and they don't understand why they can't see their friends, and yet at the same time struggling to run our business. And I want to share these with you because, I know that in the conversations I've already had with those 50 founders, that so many people are trying to go at this solo and thinking that maybe what they're experiencing and the emotions, especially if there's a lot of low lows right now, a lot of people are wondering, like, am I going through this alone, or are there other people also feeling the same way? And so, just to talk about, what mental health looks like for entrepreneurs. And I know I saw a little bit of the chat box as well with some comments. So I'm excited to be able to see those as well right after. And the thing is, I kind of want to share with all of you, and I think this is really important, coming from one founder to another. When we're playing entrepreneurship, when we've chosen entrepreneurship as our sort of journey, as our thing, one thing that we have to be really mindful of is that, entrepreneurship is an all-in sport, right? And I'm sure many of you in the startup industry, whether you're a team member, whether you're a founder, whether you're a VC, like, you guys get this, right? Like, if we're playing the game of tech startups, especially, it's really intense. It's very emotional because it brings up so much stuff in us around our leadership, around how we communicate. And the frank truth is, especially if you're holding the founder position, it's also deeply, deeply personal, right? So oftentimes when we're starting our startups, it's not just, our investors' money, but maybe we took a lot of financial sacrifices, or our family has done so in order to keep us going. And so as a result of that kind of stress, some of the stats that you can see around entrepreneurs and mental health is that because we experience so much stress, um, a lot of entrepreneurs have had struggles with mental health over the course of their lifetime, right? So some stats like, 72% of our community have experienced mental illness across their lifetime. And, 1/3 approximately have experienced depression or, for example, anxiety. And so I just want to share this with you to offer context about, you know, if you're experiencing certain feelings or certain emotions that maybe you're not used to, then, I just wanted to show you these stats to also know that this is something that, it's not just you who's going through it. There's a lot of other people who are going through it as well. And so to sort of be vulnerable and to sort of share you a little bit of my story, as I mentioned at the beginning, all of us right now on the planet are going through a black swan event, right? So you've prepared, but you've prepared. And yet nobody could have anticipated COVID-19 and the fact that so many brick and mortar businesses are closing down and whatnot. And so, for example, when I started my movement, this is at the start of 2018, I was going through a black swan event myself as a tech founder. And the experience was that, my family and I at the time, so I currently run hashtag Real Talk, right? So for Founders by Founders, as it's currently called. And prior to that, my family and I, particularly my brother, was also a tech founder in the industry. And we had been in the crypto world for some time. So right now it's probably around 7 years. And, we were in that journey for so long, and we had this company. And you can imagine, especially being in crypto, it was very, very difficult to raise money. It was super stressful all the time, regulations always changing. And back in 2017, I had my Black Swan event, which was a lot of life events that I couldn't predict that led me into a really dark place. And so in 4 months, and so this is in late 2017, I was in a major car accident. So that was September 2017. And then 3 months later, and this is my brother who, traveled to a lot of different countries in order to look at different populations who didn't have access to banking. So my brother, who was the CEO of our company, he suddenly passed away in his sleep in Christmas of 2017. And this was at the same time while our company had just closed like a national deal. Investors were so excited. We literally had all the press releases ready to go about this big thing that we were doing with national banks and stock exchanges. And then 10 days later, my mom got diagnosed with stage 3C cancer. And so I share this with you very openly because, I know that there's people out there, especially people who are watching right now, where maybe what you're going through, not just as a founder, but as a human being, is so intense. And I don't know your personal scenario. Like, I don't know if you have family members or friends or colleagues who are affected by COVID-19. But I share this with you because, it's really important for us to remember that, as founders, not only are we entrepreneurs and whatnot, but we're also human beings as well. And so, this whole slide that you see right now of these different topics, things like depression, things like cancer, things like divorce and bankruptcy, these are lists of actual topics, of actual conversations I've had with founders who've dealt with these things, being human, being a person, obviously, in our community, while having to run their entire companies at the same time. And so I just share this with you openly to let you know that, if you're running your business and you're also dealing with a lot of these like personal stresses at the same time, there's other people in our community who can also help and who understand what you're going through.